The silence in the grand ballroom was deafening. Every eye was locked on Major Ryan Whittaker as he stood ramrod straight in front of my sister. He raised his hand in a crisp, perfect salute. Then his voice cut through the air like a command on the parade field. "This low-ranked nobody you've all spent the night bullying is Lieutenant General Margaret E. Harper, Commanding General of the 18th Airborne Corps. She's the woman who saved my career when the rest of the world wanted me gone." Gasps rippled across the room. Crystal glasses froze halfway to lips. My mother's face drained of all color. Several relatives looked like they might faint. In that single heartbeat, 30 years of family shame mockery and quiet disrespect came crashing down like a collapsing bridge. My name is Daniel Carter. I'm 42 years old, a high school history teacher here in Fayetteville, North Carolina, just a few miles from Fort Liberty. For as long as I can remember, my family has treated my older sister Margaret like she was the black sheep who never quite measured up. And on my wedding day, that disrespect reached its breaking point. Margaret joined the Army in 1993, right after high school. While I headed off to college on a scholarship and eventually settled into a comfortable teaching career, she chose a different road. One filled with early mornings, heavy rucksacks, and deployments that sometimes lasted more than a year. She rarely talked about her work when she came home on leave. She'd show up in her Class B uniform ribbons lined up neatly on her chest, and Mom would immediately start in. "Maggie, when are you going to get a real job?" Mom would say, stirring sugar into her sweet tea with sharp little clicks of the spoon. "This soldier stuff isn't for women like you. You're wasting your life." Dad was still alive back then. He'd just grunt and hide behind his newspaper, but he never defended her either. After he passed in 2008 from a sudden heart attack, the criticism only grew louder and bolder. My aunts, uncles, and cousins joined the chorus at every holiday gathering, every birthday, every Sunday dinner. Still playing dress up in the army, huh? Maggie Aunt Linda would laugh her voice, carrying across the table like she was telling the funniest joke in the world. "She'll never make anything of herself," Uncle Frank would add, shaking his head while carving the roast beef. "Who's ever going to marry a woman who spends her life sleeping in barracks and taking orders?" I stayed quiet. I was the good son, the one who followed the safe, respectable path. I got the teaching degree, married a nice local girl, my first wife, who later passed away, and built a quiet life. Deep down, though, I knew Margaret was made of something stronger. There was a quiet steel in her eyes that none of us understood. She'd listen to the jabs with a small, polite smile, then change the subject to ask about my students or my garden. She never bragged. She never defended herself. She just kept serving. Over the decades, I noticed subtle changes. More ribbons appeared on her uniform. She moved from Fort Bragg to assignments overseas. Once in a while, she'd mention a new responsibility in passing. I've got a few more soldiers under me now, but she never gave details. We assumed she was still somewhere in the middle ranks, doing administrative work or training recruits. Nobody bothered to ask. When Lauren and I got engaged last year, the family naturally assumed Margaret would be invited but kept in the background. "Don't let her ruin the photos with that plain uniform," Mom warned me over the phone one evening, her voice tight with disapproval. "This is your special day, Daniel. We don't need any distractions." I didn't argue. I was exhausted from years of trying to keep the peace. So when Margaret called to confirm she could make it, I simply told her the ceremony would be at the old chapel on base and the reception at the officers' club. Her voice was warm and steady on the line. "I'll be there, Danny. I'm really proud of you." That was 3 weeks ago. I had no idea those simple words would lead to the moment that just shattered my entire family's illusions. The bullying had started the second Margaret walked into the chapel earlier today. And now as Ryan stood there with his hand still raised in salute, I realized the truth had been hiding in plain sight, all along right in front of us, wearing the same regular army uniform we had mocked for 30 years. The morning of the wedding dawned bright and clear, the kind of perfect Carolina spring day that makes you believe everything is going to go smoothly. Sunlight filtered through the live oaks surrounding the old Fort Liberty Chapel, casting dappled shadows across the whitewashed walls. The air carried the faint scent of blooming dogwoods and freshly cut grass. Inside the chapel hummed with excitement soft organ music, the rustle of dresses, and the low murmur of family and friends catching up. I stood at the front in my charcoal suit, heart pounding with a mix of joy and nerves, as Lauren walked down the aisle looking like a dream in her elegant ivory gown. Her smile lit up the entire room. For a moment, everything felt right. Then the side door opened quietly and Margaret stepped in. She wore her everyday army service uniform, the olive green one soldiers wear for regular duty. It was impeccably pressed as always with her name tape reading Harper in bold black letters. No dress blues, no rows of gleaming medals, just the standard ribbons on her chest, and the silver oak leaf of a lieutenant colonel that we had long ago stopped noticing. Her dark hair was pulled back into a tight regulation bun. She moved with that familiar quiet confidence, shoulders back, chin level, scanning the room briefly before finding her seat. The whispering started almost immediately, like dry leaves catching fire. "Look at her," Aunt Linda hissed from the third pew, loud enough for half the chapel to hear. Still in that ugly green thing. Couldn't even bother to wear something decent for her only brother's wedding. Uncle Frank leaned over, chuckling. Low-rank nobody trying to act important. Some people never learn. Cousin Tyler, already sweating in his too tight rental suit, didn't even try to whisper. "Hey Maggie, you gonna salute the preacher too?" A few relatives snickered behind their programs. I felt heat rise up my neck. Lauren squeezed my hand gently, but I could see the discomfort in her eyes. Mom seated proudly in the front row in her lavender mother of the groom dress and matching hat turned her head just enough to shoot Margaret a withering glare. "Honestly, Margaret," she muttered as my sister passed by, "couldn't you have worn something normal for once? This is Daniel's Day, not another one of your military parades." Margaret didn't flinch. She gave a small polite nod to Mum, then continued to the seat we had assigned her toward the back near the side aisle. The one we'd chosen so she wouldn't be too prominent in any photos. She sat down with perfect posture, folding her hands in her lap, and stared straight ahead at the altar. Not a word of complaint, not a single glance of hurt, just that same calm dignity she had carried for 30 years. The ceremony itself was beautiful. Lauren and I exchanged vows under the stained glass windows, promising love and partnership. The chaplain spoke movingly about commitment and sacrifice. For those 25 minutes, The bullying quieted. But the moment we stepped outside for photos, and then moved to the officers' club for the reception, it erupted again like a pressure valve finally released. The officers' club had been transformed into an elegant reception hall. White tablecloths draped every round table, crystal centerpieces sparkled under chandeliers, and an army band played soft jazz in the corner. The smell of prime rib and fresh bread filled the air. Guests laughed and clinked glasses. But every time Margaret moved through the crowd, whether to get a glass of water or simply to congratulate us, someone had something to say. She probably showed up just for the free food, Cousin Becky whispered loudly to her husband near the bar. Imagine spending your whole life taking orders and still ending up a nobody in a plain uniform. Uncle Frank added, not even lowering his voice as Margaret walked past their table. It's embarrassing for the whole family. Tyler laughed outright, raising his third bourbon. Low-rank Maggie still playing soldier at 48 years old. When are you gonna grow up? I circulated among the guests, smiling and thanking people, but my stomach was in knots. Every insult landed like a punch. I caught Margaret's eye once across the room. She gave me a small, reassuring smile, the same one she used to give me when we were kids and I'd fallen off my bike. It only made me feel worse. Why hadn't I spoken up years ago? Why had I let this go on for so long? Lauren noticed my tension. During a quiet moment between dances, she leaned in and whispered, "Danny, your family? They're being really cruel. Should we say something?" I hesitated, shame burning in my chest. I don't want to cause a scene on our wedding day, but the scene was already happening, and it was only going to get worse. Major Ryan Whitaker. My new brother-in-law moved through the crowd with his usual quiet authority. He looked sharp in his dress uniform chest, heavy with combat ribbons from multiple deployments. I had always liked Ryan. He was steady, respectful, and clearly head over heels for Lauren. Yet tonight, he seemed distracted. His eyes kept drifting toward Margaret's table in the back corner. Once I saw him start walking in her direction, only to be pulled aside by his best man for more photos. Something was off. I just didn't know what. As the evening deepened and the toasts began, the mockery grew bolder. The disrespect hung thick in the air like smoke, and I could feel the weight of 30 years of family failure pressing down on me. Little did I know, the real storm was about to break. The reception hall grew warmer as the evening wore on the chandeliers, casting a golden glow over the white linens and sparkling glassware. The scent of roasted prime rib mingled with the sweet perfume of magnolia centerpieces, while the army band played a smooth rendition of "At Last." Laughter and conversation filled the room, but beneath it all a current of cruelty pulsed like a hidden wound. I tried to focus on my new bride. Lauren looked radiant as we moved from table to table, accepting congratulations and posing for photos. Her hand felt warm and steady in mine, a quiet anchor. Yet every few minutes, my eyes drifted back to the corner table where Margaret sat alone. She sipped water slowly, her posture still perfect, watching the celebration with that same serene expression she had worn since arriving. She hadn't touched the champagne. She never did when in uniform. The jabs kept coming sharper now that alcohol had loosened tongues. At the bar, Cousin Tyler leaned heavily against the polished wood, his face flushed. "You see Maggie over there?" Still sitting like she's at attention. Bet she's waiting for someone to give her orders on when to leave. A group of younger relatives burst into laughter, their voices carrying across the dance floor. Aunt Linda, never one to miss an opportunity, joined in while adjusting her silk shawl. It's just sad, really. 30 years in the army and she's still a low-rank nobody trying to act important. Couldn't even put on a proper dress for her brother's wedding? Some people never change. Mom sat at the head table like a queen on her throne, smiling for the cameras, but shooting occasional disapproving glances toward Margaret. When one of my uncles made a toast earlier, he'd even slipped in a joke. To Daniel, and Lauren, may your marriage be stronger than Maggie's military career? A ripple of uneasy laughter followed. Mum clapped the loudest. I felt sick. My tie suddenly felt too tight, the room too loud. Inside, guilt gnawed at me like an old injury flaring up. Why hadn't I defended her? All those Thanksgivings, Christmases, and summer barbecues where the family had torn her down while I sat silent, playing the role of the successful younger brother. I had convinced myself it was just how they were. Now, on the happiest day of my life, that excuse felt hollow and shameful. Lauren noticed my distraction. During a slow dance, she rested her head on my shoulder and whispered, "Danny, you keep looking at your sister." What's wrong? I swallowed hard, the words sticking in my throat. They're being awful to her. Worse than usual? I should have seated her closer or said something. Before she could reply, I spotted Ryan again. My new brother-in-law stood near the edge of the dance floor, champagne flute in hand, but he wasn't drinking. His eyes were fixed on Margaret's table with an intensity that unsettled me. He looked like a man carrying a heavy secret. Twice I saw him start to walk toward her, only to stop when someone called his name for another photo or handshake. His jaw was tight, his shoulders squared in that unmistakable military bearing. I excused myself from Lauren and approached him during a lull. "Ryan, everything okay, man? You seem a little off tonight." He turned to me, his expression unreadable. For a long moment he studied my face as if weighing how much to say. Finally he spoke in a low, controlled voice. "Daniel, you have no idea what's really going on here. None of you do." His words sent a chill down my spine. Before I could press him further, the DJ's voice boomed over the speakers. "Ladies and gentlemen, it's time for the Groom's special speech." The room quieted. Guests turned toward the head table, clapping expectantly. Ryan set his untouched champagne down, straightened his uniform jacket, and walked to the microphone with deliberate steps. The air felt heavier now, charged with something I couldn't name. My heart beat faster. Mum smiled proudly from her seat, completely unaware of the storm about to break. Ryan cleared his throat. He thanked Lauren first, his voice warm and genuine, as he spoke of love and partnership. He thanked our parents for raising me. He even thanked the guests for sharing our day. But then his tone shifted deeper, more serious. The easy smile faded. I'd like to take a moment to recognize one very special guest who is here tonight, he said, his gaze sweeping the room. Someone who has been disrespected in this very hall far too many times this evening. A confused murmur spread through the crowd. Ryan stepped down from the head table and began walking slowly, purposefully straight towards the back corner, directly to Margaret's table. My breath caught. What was he doing? The entire room watched in puzzled silence as Major Ryan Whitaker stopped in front of my sister. Without hesitation, he came to full attention, raised his right hand in a crisp textbook salute, and held it there. Margaret looked up at him, surprise flickering across her face for the first time all day. Then she rose smoothly and returned the salute with equal precision. Ryan lowered his hand, turned to face the stunned crowd, and lifted the microphone again. His voice rang clear and strong, carrying the weight of command. This low-rank nobody that some of you have spent the entire evening bullying. This low-rank nobody that some of you have spent the entire evening bullying is Lieutenant General Margaret E. Harper, Commanding General of the 18th Airborne Corps. Ryan's words landed like artillery shells in the middle of the ballroom. The silence that followed was absolute. No clinking glasses, no whispers, just the soft hum of the air conditioning and the distant sound of my own heartbeat thundering in my ears. He stood tall beside my sister, his voice steady and commanding, the kind of voice that had led men in combat. General Harper is not only my commanding officer, she is the woman who saved my career 3 months ago when I nearly lost everything. A visible wave of shock moved through the room. Mum's hand flew to her mouth. Aunt Linda's face went ghost white. Cousin Tyler's bourbon glass slipped from his fingers and shattered on the floor, but no one even looked. Ryan continued, his gaze moving slowly across the tables, making eye contact with the very people who had been the cruelest. During a major division-level training exercise, I made a serious tactical error. It was my mistake, plain and simple. It could have cost lives in a real deployment. Several senior officers wanted my career ended. They were ready to recommend separation from the Army. But General Harper stepped in. She called me into her office at Corps headquarters, looked me in the eye, and told me exactly where I had failed. Then, instead of ending me, she spent weeks personally mentoring me. She reviewed every plan. She fought for me when others wanted me gone. Because of her, I stood before all of you today as a major, and as the man lucky enough to marry Lauren. He turned slightly toward Margaret, his posture still respectful. She commands more than 40,000 soldiers. She has led troops in combat. She has made life and death decisions in theaters most Americans will never understand. And tonight, while wearing the same everyday uniform she wears every single day to serve her country, she was treated like an embarrassment by her own family. Ryan's voice grew quieter, but no less powerful. Mrs. Carter, he said, looking directly at my mother, the woman you called a disappointment has more responsibility on her shoulders than anyone else in this room. She is the reason your son-in-law still has a future in the Army. She is the reason I could stand here today and marry the woman I love. The ballroom remained deathly quiet. I could hear the faint ticking of the large wall clock near the entrance. My mother sat, frozen tears beginning to well in her eyes. For the first time in my life, I saw genuine shame on her face. Margaret stood beside Ryan, calm and composed, as always. She placed a gentle hand on his arm and spoke for the first time all evening, her voice clear and steady with that slight southern cadence she had never lost. Major Whitaker, that was not necessary, she said softly. Ryan looked at her with deep respect. With all due respect, Mum. Yes, it was. He saluted her again, crisp and perfect. Margaret returned it. Then Ryan turned back to the crowd. I asked General Harper to attend today not just as Daniel's sister, but as my commanding officer. I wanted her here because she represents the very best of what this uniform stands for: duty, honor, and quiet strength. If any of you still feel the need to mock her, you'll have to do it in front of me." No one spoke. Several relatives looked down at their plates. A few older uncles shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The festive mood had completely evaporated, replaced by a heavy, uncomfortable silence. I stood up slowly from the head table, my legs feeling weak. The guilt I had carried all evening now felt like a physical weight on my chest. All those years of staying silent, all the times I had let my family tear her down while I played the good son. It all came rushing over me at once. Lauren reached for my hand and squeezed it tightly. Her eyes were misty too. Ryan walked back toward us, but not before giving Margaret one final respectful nod. She remained standing for a moment, scanning the room with the same steady gaze she must have used when addressing thousands of troops. Then she sat back down, still composed, still dignified. In that moment, I understood something profound. My sister hadn't hidden her success out of shame. She had hidden it because she never needed our validation. She had simply been serving her country while the rest of us were busy protecting our fragile egos. The reveal hung in the air like smoke after a cannon shot. And nothing would ever be the same again. The silence that followed Ryan's words stretched on for what felt like an eternity. No one clapped. No one cheered. The only sounds were the soft clink of a fork someone dropped and the distant hum of the air conditioning. The grand ballroom, once filled with laughter and celebration, now felt like a courtroom after a guilty verdict had been read. Mom sat completely still, her lavender dress suddenly looking too bright, too festive for the moment. Her perfectly applied makeup couldn't hide the tears welling in her eyes, or the way her lower lip trembled. For the first time in my life, I saw true remorse on her face. Aunt Linda had gone pale, fanning herself with a napkin. Cousin Tyler stared at the floor, his earlier bravado completely shattered. Several relatives quietly gathered their belongings and slipped out the side doors, heads down, unwilling to face the consequences of their cruelty. I stood up from the head table, my legs shaky, and walked straight to Margaret. Lauren followed close behind. When I reached my sister, I didn't know what to say. 30 years of unspoken apologies caught in my throat. "Maggie," my voice cracked. "I'm so sorry for all of it." Margaret looked at me with those steady, kind eyes I had known since childhood. There was no anger in them, only a deep, weary understanding. She pulled me into a hug, the same strong, reassuring hug she used to give me when I was a scared little boy. She smelled faintly of starch and the familiar scent of her uniform. "It's all right, Danny," she whispered. "You didn't know." But I had known enough. I had heard the mockery for decades and chosen silence. That truth burned inside me now. Ryan joined us, standing at a respectful distance. General I meant every word he said quietly. Margaret nodded. "You did well tonight, Major. But remember, this wasn't about me. It was about respect for the uniform and the people who wear it." Mom finally found the courage to approach. She moved slowly, as if every step cost her something. When she reached Margaret, her voice came out small and broken. "Maggie, I didn't know. All these years, I thought you were just struggling. I was so wrong. Can you ever forgive me?" Margaret studied our mother for a long moment. The room watched in hushed silence. Then she spoke with quiet grace. I forgave you a long time ago, Mum. I had to. Carrying resentment would have distracted me from my duty. But forgiveness doesn't erase the hurt. I hope tonight helps you understand what this uniform really means. Mom's shoulders shook as she began to cry openly. Margaret placed a gentle hand on her arm, the first real touch of comfort between them in years. It wasn't a full reconciliation, but it was a beginning. The remaining guests spoke in hushed, respectful tones. The band had stopped playing. Some people came forward to apologize to Margaret. Others simply sat in stunned reflection. The festive wedding reception had transformed into something deeper, a moment of reckoning for our entire family. Later that evening, after most guests had left, Margaret, Lauren, Ryan, and I sat on the quiet balcony overlooking Fort Liberty. The lights of the bay spread out below us like a sea of stars. A gentle breeze carried the faint scent of pine and distant jet fuel. Margaret had finally removed her uniform jacket, draping it carefully over the back of her chair. "Why didn't you ever tell us?" I asked, my voice thick with emotion. "All those years of ridicule. You could have shut them down any time." Margaret looked out at the base lights, her face soft in the moonlight. "Because my rank was never the point, Danny. I didn't join the army to impress our family. I joined to serve something bigger than myself. The soldiers under my command, the missions we carried out, the young men and women who depended on me, that was what mattered. Bragging about stars on my shoulders wouldn't have changed how they treated me. It would have only made them resent me more." She turned to Ryan. "And you, Major, you didn't have to do what you did tonight." Ryan smiled. "Yes, ma'am. I did. You saved my career. More importantly, you showed me what real leadership looks like. The least I could do was make sure your own family finally saw it." Lauren reached across the table and took Margaret's hand. "Thank you for being here, and for being who you are." As the night grew cooler, I sat with my sister and realized how much we had all lost by not seeing her clearly. The real shame had never belonged to Margaret. It had belonged to us, to me, for failing to honor her sacrifice and quiet strength. That night taught me something I will carry for the rest of my life. Respect isn't earned only on the battlefield. Sometimes it must be earned at home in the face of those who should have loved you best. If you've ever looked down on someone because of their uniform, their job, or the path they chose, especially a service member, take a moment tonight to reflect. Military families carry burdens most of us never see. A simple thank you or a moment of genuine respect can mean more than you'll ever know. Share this story if it moved you. And if you know a veteran or active duty service member, reach out and tell them they matter.